This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
If it doesn't get to the market on time, it rocks up late or gets put on the floor the next day, their prices are affected. And that means so much to the fishermen, just to be viable, just to have a viable business.
This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. I'm John Susman.
The transportation of fresh seafood is as challenging as the process of catching and growing seafood itself. With more than a third of the final cost of seafood products made up of transport, the importance of maximising efficiency in the logistics of moving seafood from water to plate is an ever-growing imperative. A working concept of sustainability is also reliant on freight maximisation. Delivering seafood at the lowest cost to the environment is a much overlooked yet critical part of the sustainability cycle. Transport also has a huge role in minimising financial losses due to spoilage or contamination of fresh seafood. A good freight system also minimises financial losses by maximising the shelf life of seafood. Science claims that every hour of fresh seafood is exposed to temperatures over 4 degrees Celsius. Its shelf life is reduced by a day. The business of moving seafood is as fickle as the business of catching and growing seafood. Operators are as much at the mercy of Mother Nature as fishermen themselves. Volumes can fluctuate dramatically, and operationally transport companies need to be fluid and flexible, responding to ever-changing conditions, supply and market demands. A deep knowledge of seafood handling needs to be combined with historical seasonal catching, harvesting and demand data, combining close relationships with catchers, processors and buyers to identify their needs is what is required to become a good operator in the seafood freight business. Ricky Mezic owns and operates SA Seafood Express, one of Australia's most successful and dynamic specialist seafood distribution businesses. His intergenerational history in catching, processing and retailing seafood gives him a unique understanding for seafood, which underpins the success of his transport business.
So my name is Ricky Mezic. I own the business with my brother, SA Seafood Express and Jojo's Fish. We're located in Adelaide, Torrensville. That's where our depot is. You know, our family came from the islands of Croatia. Dad, my grandfather and great-grandfather was a fisherman. Then my grandfather was a merchant seaman and came over to Australia. He chose between Australia and America and settled here in Adelaide. So Dad became a sheep metal worker to start with, and then joined my uncle in Port Lincoln, tuna fishing, lobster, prawn, salmon. Pretty much whatever they could make a life out of. That was like in the late 60s. I think it was about 68, 69. So that was in the real infancy of a lot of fisheries in South Australia. I vividly remember as a 5-year-old holding Dad's knee, and we were punching through the swell in Venus Bay. That's in the west coast of South Australia. So I really remember that. That stuck in my head all these years.
Transforming passion into opportunity is a regular theme of successful people across the seafood industry. Ricky Mezic's passion for seafood reflects this in his transport business.
That's right. I wasn't much of a scholar, John. All I wanted to do is be like Dad and go fishing. So I left school at 14, which is pretty early, and got an apprenticeship at Adelaide Ship Construction. So I did that for 4 years, and a job came up on the family boat, which I jumped at. It was sort of minimum wage, and started off as a decky under some pretty hard skippers and expert skippers, and sort of worked my way through the ranks. Got my engineer's ticket, marine engine driver's ticket, and then became the skipper, I think, in the early 90s. When I started, it was like in 1983, and back then we were doing probably 130 nights a year, where compared to today, they do about 50 nights a year. So through the years, the Spencer Gulf fishery, prawn fishery, is managed and efficient catching to get it into 50 nights. So yeah, the prawn fishery was in its infancy back in the 80s, and it developed into a strong fishery today. It was exciting. I really enjoyed the catch, and you work the elements, and it was hard. Just chocolates and coffee would keep you up. So it was hard in them days, but you just push on for the family, and you work through all the hardships, and made some good friends throughout the industry, which is still there today.
Fish and seafood retail is a far more intricate business than pretty much every other part of the food chain. Most chicken and meat retailers have one core product, while a seafood retailer often has over 100 varieties to meet the consumer demands. Managing the dynamics of seafood in retail provided Ricky valuable experience in how the seafood supply chain works.
We actually got into retail in the 91, just as I got married, and tried ourselves in seafood retail, and it was a fish and chip shop in Adelaide, and we bought it off a well-known Adelaide fishmonger. I did it for a couple of years. I just couldn't wait to go back fishing, and I think then the skipper left. The skipper that Dad had left, and there was an opening to be a skipper. I just remember it was so nerve-wracking starting that first trip, and coming home from that trip. I remember the old man said, "If you can't catch, I'll get someone else to catch." So he put the word on me straight away, and the next trip I was the top catcher. Continued fishing for some 28 years there in the prawn boat.
Family business can often be the victim of emotional rather than strategic decision-making. Ricky and his brother Anthony's decision to expand into seafood freight, although driven by necessity, proved to be a valuable lifeline not only for themselves but for many small South Australian fishing communities, providing a direct link to the markets in Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney, connecting fishermen with buyers across the country.
2015, my dad passed away, and we bought the Stevron Transport, an existing refrigerated transport business that was set up by a couple of local fishermen with a necessity to send fresh fish over to Melbourne and Sydney. That's how it all started for them. So we bought that, and the first thing we do was rebranded the business into SA Seafood Express, specifically to promote South Australian seafood. So we did that, and sort of continued on. 2018, the family decided to get out of the prawn business, which my brother and I were really devastated over that decision. But life goes on, and we were very lucky to come across the transport business, and part of that transport business is a wholesale arm, which is Jojo's Fish, which is very well known in Sydney market and Melbourne markets. So we continued with the few select fishermen that supply us, and they're still with us today. So we do a twice a week run from Port Lincoln to Adelaide. So that'd be on a Tuesday and a Saturday. We do a separate run to Spencer Gulf region, York Peninsula, again twice a week. twice a week from Adelaide to Melbourne and twice a week from Adelaide to Sydney Fish Market. So it all comes here to our depot on a Tuesday, and from various locations, various species, and then we cross-dock everything, sort into Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, and deliver, to the markets. It's really important for the smaller fishermen, where to use there are other transport providers, but if they have, say, 5 tubs of snapper or King George whiting or something, they can't put it on another transport provider where they'll be charged a pallet rate. So it's just not viable on other transport companies. The bigger fishermen or the fishing companies, it's okay for them, but the smaller guys, they really rely on us. We're the only dedicated South Australian transport company.
Trust is of paramount importance across the seafood supply chain. Having trust determines the market's acceptance that everything is as it should be in a product's journey all the way from water to plate. Transparency of provenance and history, combined with truth in labelling and seafood supply, not only underpins but is the core of the concept of trust in the seafood supply chain.
Buyers, they have to trust you. It's all in the trust, and if they feel good about working with you, they'll work with you. So, I left actually prawning back in 2010 and joined the Prawn Cooperative, South Australian Prawn Cooperative, where I set up a stall at Adelaide Fish Market, the Safco auction floor, and I was selling there on a morning basis, the king prawns. And the buyer, you got to know the buyers. They can see who you are. I got a habit of smiling all the time, so they like that. And they got to trust you. It's like you go buy a car, and if you like the salesman, you buy it off him. So that was a real important part for the South Australian Cooperative. It's not there. I left in 2015. The cooperative, that's when we bought this business. And in hindsight, I'm glad I moved away from it, because the prawn co-op ended up in some situation there, and it folded up. I visit the Adelaide market every day still, 5 days a week. I'm there. We do a delivery to the market. Like I said before, some fish would go to Melbourne, some would go to Sydney, and some would go to Adelaide. So we actually do some sorting for Raptus and Sons. They're trawl vessels in the Great Australian Bight. Well, we unload them in Port Lincoln on a Friday. That comes here on a Saturday morning, early 3 a.m. So we've got roughly about 10 guys sorting out the fish into different Adelaide orders, and we deliver that to the fish markets, the fish market on a Monday, first thing in the morning, and then some gets sent to Sydney and some gets sent to Melbourne, and some to Brisbane too, the Raptus and Sons in Brisbane.
The rapidly changing landscape in commercial fisheries around the country is having a significant impact across the supply chain in seafood. As total allowable catches are reduced, a reducing and ageing group of fishers, and an increase in aquaculture production, the role and responsibility of the seafood freight company is also changing.
In the last 12 months here, especially in South Australia, they've had a restructure in the marine scale industry, which is a multi-species fishery. And the government brought in quotas for key species like garfish, King George, snapper, and they were the main ones, and calamari, that was the biggest one. So, that's at the time they were saying fishermen will target the non-key species, but that actually hasn't happened. The fishermen are targeting the quota fisheries where the money is for them, and that's understandable. but the rest of the species have sort of dropped off in supply. So we're not seeing that. We notice it on our trucks, what's going to Melbourne and Sydney. It's a lot less than when we started here. So what we're not seeing is the young people in the industry. It's sort of, with the quotas being introduced, it's hard for the young people to buy into that quota where it's so expensive. So, and even the fishmonger side, there's no new blood coming in. It's a bit it's a bit disappointing. I think, a lot of aquaculture, that's really starting to take off these days. It's just a continuous supply into the market. The wild catches, the wild catch fisheries are still there, but, the supply sort of dwindled away for reasons of, marine parks restrictions, and, there are some negative impacts there where quotas don't tell the story of what's the actual conditions of the year, the elements, the water temperature, that's like real time stuff, and the quotas sort of, the management looks at it the next year and, you've caught so much, we can give you some more quota that next year. But, well, the conditions may change that next year. So it's a real hard one, sustainability. But the fishermen know, they don't want to muck it up for themselves. They want to keep continuing fishing.
Fishing is infectious. The golden handcuffs of passion can sometimes tie fishermen to a life on the sea, taking charge of their lives, livelihood and families. To move from sea to land and maintain a passion for seafood is rare.
I miss it when I was doing good. When I wasn't catching as good, it was the worst place in the world to be. I wouldn't go back to it. I enjoy what I do now. It's a big transition from the sea to the land. But, I always knew I wasn't going to be a fisherman all my life. I really enjoy what I'm doing now, and I still got passion for the seafood. Doesn't matter what it is, It's prawns, it's oysters, it's snapper, it's all the species. I just love it. I still love it. My wife always says to me, "Why don't you get a hobby?" All I say, my hobby is fish. That's my hobby. That's what gets me up in the morning. I know I got fish in the chiller. I know I got to get it. That customer, I know I got to get to the markets. We've been here now, the transport business, for 7 years, and we haven't missed a Sydney market or a Melbourne market yet. So that's a feat in itself. What we notice in this, like especially since the virus, COVID, and all that. Other transport companies just can't get there on time to the markets. The markets work to their times with their customers, but other transport companies have to they send their fish to, say, Melbourne, and then it goes to their depot, and they got to unload and reload, and then it goes to the market. Where our truck leaves our depot, goes straight to the fish market. We're the first one on the dock. And that happens in Melbourne and Sydney and Adelaide. So, like I said, we're the dedicated seafood transport provider.
With fishermen now only 2 mouse clicks away from cooks, the catalyst to change in the seafood supply chain is transport. With increasing costs and a need to operate sustainably, driving efficiency is as much a part of the job as driving trucks in operating a successful freight business into the future.
We're working closely with Sydney Fish Market. Recently, we've signed up an agreement for their new online sales platform, Sydney Seafood Blue, I think it is, SFM Blue, yes, that's right. So we're going to be the sole South Australian distributor here. And that's really exciting. That's the way the world's going online. So we're pretty excited about that. We'll bring a few more customers to our premises. and hopefully work good for the fishermen, where they'll get a return and not create gluts in the market, individual sort of states and the markets. I'm still excited. We're just, it's a tough business out there now. Like the transport, the costs are huge now with the fuel and that. It's killing us. But we're pushing through. There's a couple of, we've had a few tough years. It's been, firstly was the POMS virus with the oysters. That hit us hard with our oyster freight, and we never really got that back. And then there was the snapper fishery was closed in South Australia. That's all good weight fish for us, and that's supposedly going to be open in 2023 in January. But we're hoping that will come, and it won't be it'll surely help. And this excise on the fuel, and that's been the hardest one for us, So, we'll keep on going, and hopefully times get better.
The quality, value and safety of seafood is determined by the efficiency of the freight used to get it to market. Of recent times, there is also growing importance of the freight system used in regards to the sustainability of seafood. Whether it's a small artisanal fisherman or a corporate aquaculture business, freight has an impact more than ever before on the commercial operations in seafood. The unique nuances of moving seafood around is a specialised business which demands an intimate knowledge, understanding and passion for seafood. Ricky Mezic is a unique, special and vital operator in the seafood industry.
This is Fishtales, a seafood podcast. A Deep in the Weeds production. I'm John Susman. Follow us on Instagram at Fishtales Seafood Podcast, or email us at fishtalespodcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay tuned for more tales from beneath the surface of the seafood world every Friday on your podcast app.